I don't know about you, but family reunions have always felt kinda weird. We recently went to a big reunion in Boise, Idaho, a desert city which greeted us with not only high temperatures, but also an immense mugginess trapped underneath the sky, so choked with smoke from far-off smoldering wildfires that you couldn't see the mountains beside the highway. The reunion, which spanned 3 generations of extended family hailing from literally all over the country, many of whom I've met only once before, if that, raised questions to me later on about alienation, and I guess the state of the family under conditions of a socioeconomic system that so powerfully subjects people into a kind of individualism. Like, what is the real practical difference between a group of extended family that live otherwise separate and apart from one another, getting together every few years, and say, a gathering of coworkers or a church congregation? People, mostly white people as it turns out, have said that the family is the foundation of civilization, but this is complicated by the fact that the family's shape and social function has never been the same across all places and times, and that its function at any given historical moment is as much a symptom as a cause of its social environment. Speaking of white people, family reunions are just such a symptom. Historian Robert M. Taylor Jr., writing in the Journal of Social History, locates the rise of family reunions in the late 1800s among white middle-class Protestants who were confronting a changing social order that upset their ideological assumptions of what society ought to look like. Among these changes, Taylor lists the differentiation of public and private spheres as a result of institutional specialization in religion, education, and the family economy, the severing of occupational links between fathers and sons, a growing assertiveness and independence of daughters, the increased mobility and fragmentation of extended family and adult children as jobs moved to urban centers, and the increases in divorce and childlessness that accompanied such upheavals, and massive migrations, both domestically and from abroad. In the face of what Taylor calls feelings of uprootedness and alienation from habitual ways of thinking and doing, these middle-class white families reacted by not only turning inward to protect and pacify, but reaching out to living relatives as well as back in time to recover some sense of ancestral heritage. The rise of interest in family genealogies coincides with the rise of family reunions. Faced with the perceived threat of foreign immigration, the increased mobility of African Americans and others, and the rise of post-Civil War corporate capitalism, Taylor says that the stretching of generational memory through kin gatherings and genealogies represented a kind of mini-social movement, a voluntaristic and moral crusade among middle-class white Protestants who, caught in the anomalies of rapid social change, sought to comprehend their situation and control their future. The sudden need for certain knowledge about one's parentage and family roles recurs from this point in history every 30 to 40 years. In the 1930s, a new thrust coincided with similar social and economic threats to white middle-class families during the Great Depression. Again in the 60s and 70s, another wave of white middle-class worry over the survival of the family accompanied an unpopular war in Vietnam, civil rights protests, and the rise of second-wave feminism, among other things. These mini-social movements, these crises in the meaning and the function of the family, can be read as reactions against a real phenomenon affecting more than just middle-class white folks, something that social theorists have long recognized to be intrinsic to the modern capitalistic system in which we live and move. Around the time family reunions were taking off in the US, Karl Marx recognized that under capitalism, a system in which a very few own and manage what he calls the means of production, that is, the land, the raw materials, tools, and wealth necessary to produce not only more wealth, but nearly all the products by which human beings subsist and survive, not to mention desire, consume, and enjoy. A system in which the rest of us who do not own these means must sell our labor to those few in exchange for wages. The whole class of workers is set up to be alienated. When, as Marx puts it, the worker sinks to the level of a commodity, which is ultimately replaceable and exchangeable, that person experiences a kind of alienation from, first of all, the product of their labor. We put our lives into our work because we have to live, but the output of our work immediately belongs to someone else. Marx sees this situation as necessarily inhibiting human potential from its own creativity and spontaneity, its capacity for free, conscious activity. And ultimately, the extension of market relationships into social life means that human beings become alienated from each other. People are pitted against each other in competition for jobs and the accumulation of things, preventing them from understanding their shared condition. It makes sense that these conditions would intensify during the economic crises that capitalistic production inevitably creates, which in turn contribute to geographic displacement, conflicts, and warfare. The kind of upheavals that we saw at the beginning of family reunions. Around the same time, Emile Durkheim was looking at the same alienation in human being and relationships and finding its source in the radical drive to remove controls on consumption and acquisition that capitalism advocates. Industry, instead of being still regarded as a means to an end transcending itself, has become the supreme end of individuals and societies alike, Durkheim writes, arguing that the nearly infinite extension of the market into the fabric of life results in a liberation of infinite desires. Combined with our alienation from ourselves, our work, and each other, the drive toward infinite consumption and acquisition leads to a type of insecurity that Durkheim calls anomie, a contradictory state of being unmoored from our moral identity as humans because of this radical removal of the regulation of desire, combined with a kind of faith in it as a good thing. Durkheim sums it up this way: setbacks necessarily increase with risks, and thus crises multiply just when they are becoming more destructive. Yet these dispositions are so inbred that society has grown to accept them and is accustomed to think them normal. It is everlastingly repeated that it is man's nature to be eternally dissatisfied, constantly to advance, without relief or rest, toward an indefinite goal. Durkheim sees that far from natural, the only way we can see this longing for infinity as a mark of moral distinction is as a social construction, the elevation to the level of a moral rule, what is actually an absence of rule. This idea that the best system is one of unfettered, unregulated capitalism, that competition is best for society, is the modern-day equivalent of what Durkheim critiques. Today, we call it neoliberalism. Alienation foments crises of meaning, of the sort that sparked the white middle-class family reunion and genealogy craze. But not all social change is bad, and these social moments do ask for re-examination. In the face of alienation and anomie, clearly a lot of white middle-class folks in the US decided to try to reach back to some irretrievable past form of power and stability, a set of traditional family structures and gender roles. But as Taylor and, history bears out, these efforts were sort of doomed to, at most, delay changes that were already in progress. Obviously, under the surface of these early American reactionary movements was fear of losing patriarchal power and status to the feared other, women, people of color, and immigrants. Movements like that tend to fail to see wider human commonality under the coercions of capitalism, rather accepting narratives of necessary competition and conflicts that must be won. But instead of trying to bring back something, what if we retooled our ideas about the meaning and function of human relationships? What if we thought critically about what we want family to look like? Families and family roles have always appeared and functioned differently in different places and times. I like Norman Pittenger's definition of the familial relationship in his book Belonging and Becoming, where the family isn't necessarily the so-called nuclear family, but any relatively close-knit unit or group premised on the expression of belonging with mutual love and concern, sympathy and understanding, and hence the opportunity and occasion for enrichment and growth in each of the participants. On this model, the family eschews objectifying its members as simply extensions of the identity of parent figures, and it resists the forces of alienation imposed from the outside by premising the relationship on genuine mutuality, wherein, Pittenger says, one knows others and enjoys being with them, yet with due regard for their integrity and for their personal identity. At the same time, though, they are not thought to be individuals in isolation from others, but rather persons in process, constituted by their connectedness, their shared concerns and interests with other persons. This model of the family is based on solidarity, sharing, and a holistic view of personhood. What's neat to me is that this idea of family certainly can include, but doesn't require, blood ties. Our relations with others may be mediated by commodities like Facebook, Twitter, and, well, YouTube, but these same conditions can also enable a more diffuse solidarity and connection with other people than has ever been possible before. By using these tools to literally foster family each other, perhaps we can offer an imminent critique of the forces of alienation that threaten human relationships in the first place.